The application sat in the pile like any other. Neat handwriting, no gaps in employment. References from 2 hotels in Cincinnati that no one at the Hargrove Grand would ever bother to call. The name at the top read Marcus Webb and Denise Pryor. The hotel's head of housekeeping did not look at it twice when she pulled it from the stack on a Thursday morning in October. She had 4 floors understaffed going into the winter conference season, a linen delivery arriving Friday that her team could not turn fast enough, and a night shift vacancy that had been open for 3 weeks. Marcus Webb had experience. Marcus Webb was available immediately. Marcus Webb, whoever he was, would do. She called him at 11. He answered on the second ring. She told him to come in Monday at 6:45 and to wear shoes he didn't mind ruining. She did not know who she was speaking to. She could not have known. The Hargrove Grand sat at the corner of 5th and Commerce in downtown Atlanta, 41 floors of glass and stone that had been built on the legacy of one man and run for the past 8 years by the son he had left behind. The hotel's owner, a man named Calvin Hargrove, was 39 years old, worth somewhere north of $240 million, and had not set foot on the property in 2 years. The board knew this. His general manager, Gerald Watts, knew this. What neither of them knew was that Calvin Hargrove had spent the last 6 weeks studying the hotel's internal complaint logs, its turnover records, and its online reviews, and that what he had read there had kept him awake more nights than he cared to count. He had not liked what he found. Guest complaints about dirty rooms caught 3 weeks after a deep clean rotation, kitchen staff citing unsafe working conditions in emails that were forwarded up and then quietly buried. 3. Housekeeping staff in 1 year citing a manager by name in their exit interviews, the same name appearing each time, a name that belonged to someone Gerald Watts had promoted twice. And beneath all of it, a pattern Calvin recognized, the way you recognize something you already knew and had been hoping wasn't true. A hotel coasting on its name, managed by people who had forgotten that the name meant something because the man whose name it was had stayed away too long. He could have sent an auditor. He had one on retainer. He had sent himself instead. The fake name had been straightforward enough to arrange. His attorney had flagged 2 items in the liability column and then drafted the paperwork anyway, because Calvin's attorney had been doing this long enough to understand that when Calvin made up his mind about something, the conversation that followed was not about whether, but about how carefully. The legal exposure was manageable. The alternative, walking into his own hotel as its owner, would produce a performance. Every manager would stand up straighter. Every supply room would be swept the night before. Every grievance would be temporarily misplaced. He did not want a performance. He wanted to see what the Hargrove Grand looked like at 2 in the morning when no one who mattered was watching. He had expected to learn something about the hotel. He had not expected Denise Pryor. She met him in the service entrance on his first morning, a Monday at 6:45. She was 42 years old, lean and steady in the way of someone who had spent 2 decades on her feet, and she wore her grey housekeeping supervisor's uniform with a posture that had nothing to do with authority granted from above and everything to do with a person who had stopped needing external confirmation of what she already knew about herself. Her hair was pulled back in a tight natural bun, and she carried a worn, laminated orientation packet that she had clearly used 100 times. Because the corners had gone soft from handling and the print on the front cover had begun to fade at the fold, she handed it to him without ceremony. "You read this tonight before your next shift," she said. "I don't run orientation twice. If you have questions after you read it, come find me in the morning. If you have questions you should have asked before you took the job, keep them to yourself until you figure out the answers." He almost smiled. He did not. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked at him for a moment. The way experienced people look at new hires, assessing the gap between what a resume says and what a pair of hands can actually do. It was a specific kind of look, economical and unhurried, the look of someone who had been wrong about new hires before and had decided that the cost of being wrong was not worth the energy of optimism. "You've done this work before?" she said. It was not a question. "A long time ago," he said. "My mother cleaned rooms. I helped her on weekends." Denise said nothing to that. She simply handed him a and pointed him toward the 14th floor. He would think about that first morning for a long time afterward, the way she had heard what he said about his mother, and neither softened nor hardened, simply filed it and moved on. She was not a woman who read sentiment into information. She was a woman who read information. His mother had cleaned rooms. That part was true. Evelyn Hargrove had worked housekeeping at a motor lodge outside Memphis for 11 years, while Calvin's father built the first Hargrove property from a single-story motel into something that required a proper general manager. Calvin had helped her on Saturdays. He had been 10 years old the first time she showed him how to strip a bed fast, folding the corners so the linen came off in one motion rather than three, and he had been 12 when she explained why. You always checked behind the headboard. Not because guests left things there on purpose, but because that was where the room told you the truth about how it had been cleaned the last time. His father had built the hotels. His mother had taught him what a hotel room actually was. He had not thought about that in years. On the 14th floor, he worked. He worked the way Denise had shown him on a brief walk through that first morning, methodically and without shortcuts, starting at the far end of the corridor and moving toward the elevator so that his cart never blocked a guest's exit. He stripped beds and remade them to the specification in the orientation packet, which was tighter than he had expected and which he realized within the first 2 rooms was Denise's specification, rather than anything he had seen in the hotel's printed standards manual. She had written more care into that worn laminated packet than the official document contained. What he found in those rooms over the first 3 days told him everything the complaint logs had suggested and more. A ventilation duct above room 1408 that bore a thin grey film that could not have accumulated over days. A grout line in the bathroom of 1412 that had been bleached but not replaced. A surface fix applied to a structural problem that would return within the month. A mattress in 1419 that showed the particular sag of a piece of furniture that had been turned and turned again past the point where turning helped, which he flagged on the internal maintenance form and which, by his 3rd shift, had still not been replaced. The form had gone somewhere, he did not know where. He filed the forms. He watched them go. He was beginning to understand the shape of the problem, and the shape was not what he had expected when he had pulled up the complaint logs in his home office 6 weeks ago and started reading. The problem was not laziness. The women and the 2 men who moved those carts across the 14th floor day after day, who showed up before 7 and stayed past their scheduled end because the rooms were not finished. Who ate lunch standing in the supply corridor because there was nowhere else to sit and the break room was shared with a department that had somehow claimed the only table. These people were not lazy. They were managed badly, supplied inconsistently, and overseen by a man named Terence Cole, who appeared on their floor roughly twice a shift to check that nothing visible had gone wrong and otherwise left them to make decisions that should have been made by someone with the authority and the information to make them well. On Thursday of his first week, Denise came to the 14th floor herself. He watched her work the way he watched everything, now with the specific attention of someone who has stopped assuming he already knows what he will see. She moved through room 1406 with a precision that had the quality of something long practiced and never loosened, reading each surface not for what it looked like but for what it meant, running a fingertip along the baseboard behind the radiator, checking the seal on the bathroom fixture where the tile met the tub, opening the closet to verify the hangers were uniformly spaced and that the spare blanket was folded with its seam facing in. She was not inspecting to find fault. She was inspecting because that was what the job required, and she did the job as if the person who would sleep in that room mattered whether they were a conference attendee on a corporate rate or someone who had saved for a year to afford the room. She finished 1406 and moved to the doorway. "You're quiet," she said, not looking at him. "Just watching," he said. "Why?" He considered the honest answer and chose the true part of it, trying to learn the standard. She looked at him, then that same assessing look from the first morning. "The standard in this building," she said, "is whatever I can hold with the people I have and the supplies they give me. That is not the standard I set. That is the standard they fund." She paused. "We are short 2 industrial steam cleaners. I have been requesting replacements since August. I have been told twice it is in the budget review. "It is November." She left the room without waiting for a response. He stood there for a moment in 1406, the bed finished and the closet closed and the window showing the city in flat, early morning light, and he did the arithmetic he had done 100 times in other contexts, the straightforward kind, the kind where the numbers told you exactly what a decision had cost. 2 industrial steam cleaners, commercial grade, $1,200 to $1,500 each, against a property that charged $340 a night for a standard room, more for anything facing the skyline, far more for the executive suites, against a property that bore the name Hargrove on its entrance in letters that were lit at night and visible from the bridge. He picked up his cart and moved to 1407. That evening he called his assistant, a young man named David Park, from a number that could not be traced to him. He kept his voice level and said 4 things. He said he needed the last 3 years of Hargrove Grand Maintenance requisitions, organized by department. He said he needed Watts's written performance evaluations for Terence Cole, all of them going back to Cole's first promotion. He said he needed the last full payroll audit for the housekeeping department, specifically the comparison between housekeeping salaries and the median for comparable Atlanta properties. And he said he needed to know who had signed off on the budget reduction that cut the equipment line in the housekeeping supply order from the prior fiscal year, because somewhere in this building someone had decided that the people cleaning the rooms could make do with less, and he wanted to know whose name was on that. David said he would have it by morning. Calvin said not to call unless something was on fire. He lay in the dark of his apartment that night and thought about the ventilation duct in 1408 and the form that had gone nowhere and the 2 steam cleaners that had been in a budget review since August. And he thought, not for the first time, about what it felt like to hold a standard in a building that had stopped funding the standard. He had held standards of a different kind in his own career, standards of conduct and quality, and the treatment of people who worked for him, and he knew what it cost to hold them when the environment pushed back. He did not know what it cost to hold them for 10 years in a corridor under fluorescent lights while the equipment wore out around you and the requests went unanswered and the managers above you promoted the people who made the problem worse. He thought he was beginning to know. He did not sleep well. The second week brought the linen crisis, which arrived on a Friday morning as the weekly delivery came in, short by approximately 60 units. Because someone in procurement had transposed 2 digits in a supply order and which Denise absorbed without visible distress. Standing in the receiving dock with the delivery manifest in one hand and her floor rotation schedule in the other, doing the arithmetic in her head. He watched her redistribute the morning assignments so that the shortfall would fall heaviest on the rooms that had the longest time before their next scheduled occupancy, which meant guest-facing floors would not feel it. Which meant 60 guests at the Hargrove Grand that weekend would sleep in rooms that had been properly turned and would not know that the woman who had made that possible had arrived before 6 in the morning and rearranged her entire team's day in the time it took to sign the delivery receipt. She did not mention it afterward. She simply moved to the next thing. Calvin found he had no language for what he was watching that was adequate to it. He had managed operations at a scale most people never touched. He understood logistics. He understood the kind of problem-solving that happened under pressure when the variables shifted without warning. But there was something specific to what Denise did that did not map cleanly onto the operational thinking he was used to, because what she was managing was not only a logistical problem, but a human one. The particular challenge of keeping a team's morale level when the building they worked in kept finding new ways to make their work harder. And doing it without false reassurance and without visible frustration, simply by modeling the thing she needed them to do, which was to absorb the next problem and solve it and move on. On the Friday afternoon, Cole came to the 14th floor. Calvin was in the supply corridor between rooms, restocking his cart with fresh linen, when he heard Cole's voice down the hallway, that specific conversational register of someone accustomed to minor authority, the tone that arrives at a decision and states it without consulting the room. Cole was standing near room 1403 speaking to Rosa Mendez, who had been cleaning rooms at the Hargrove Grand for 9 years and who Calvin had established in his first 2 weeks as the most efficient member of the floor staff by a margin that was measurable and significant. Rosa could turn a double room in 22 minutes, which was 3 minutes faster than the standard the orientation packet specified. She had shown him 2 of the techniques she used on his 4th day without being asked and without making a production of it, simply demonstrating, because she had noticed he was slower than he needed to be at the closet check. Cole was telling Rosa that her cart was improperly loaded. Calvin paused where he was and looked down the corridor. The cart was not improperly loaded. He had been working from the same loading configuration for 2 weeks because Denise had shown it to him on the first morning as the correct configuration for this floor's room layout, and Rosa's cart matched it exactly. The placement Cole was pointing at. The stacking order of the clean linen on the upper shelf was the correct placement. Changing it to the arrangement Cole was now describing would require Rosa to reach across the cart rather than down from it, which would cost her roughly 4 seconds per room entry, and, across a full shift on this floor, something between 20 and 30 minutes. Rosa did not say any of this. She adjusted the cart the way Cole indicated, her face composed, and said, "Yes, sir," in the voice of a woman who had made a calculation long ago about what it cost to be right in this particular building versus what it cost to comply and move forward with her day. Cole nodded, apparently satisfied, and moved down the corridor toward the elevator. Calvin stood with his cart in the supply alcove and listened to the elevator arrive and depart. He was aware of the version of this moment in which he said something. He was aware that he had the authority, standing in that corridor in that uniform, to say something that would carry weight he could not yet deploy, and that saying it would show a hand he was not ready to show. He was also aware that the discipline of not saying it was costing him something, a small and specific kind of erosion that he suspected Rosa had been absorbing in quantities he could not fully measure for 9 years. He let Cole's absence settle into the corridor, and he pushed his cart toward 1407. And he added a note to the private record he had been building in his head, the record that was growing longer every shift. He filed the written note to David's folder that evening. In the 3rd week, he learned about the grievance, and he did not learn it the way he had expected to learn things in this building, which was from documents. He learned it the way information travels in places where the people doing the work understand that certain subjects are only safe to approach sideways. A fragment of conversation between Rosa and Kim, the morning lead on the 12th floor near the elevator bank. On a Tuesday morning, a conversation that closed cleanly when Calvin came within hearing range the way conversations do when a new hire is not yet fully trusted. A name offered once and not repeated, a woman who had worked on this floor 8 months ago. The specific quiet that followed the name, he had seen that name in the exit interview files. He had noted it then without fully understanding what he was noting. That evening he asked David for the full grievance file associated with that name. What David sent him the next morning was not a full file. It was 3 pages of a proceeding that appeared from its own internal references to run to 11. The remaining 8 pages had been archived in a restricted subfolder that required Watts's direct credentials to access, and which David, who had Calvin's authorization for a significant range of administrative access, did not have. Calvin read the 3 pages he had twice. He thought for a long time. He thought about the guest review 6 months ago that had described a room that smelled of trapped moisture and a front desk interaction that had felt dismissive. He thought about the exit interviews, the name that appeared 3 times in 3 separate files, the same name, a manager whose conduct had been documented by 3 people who no longer worked in this building, and one, Denise, who still did, and whose documentation had apparently gone somewhere other than where it was intended to go. He thought about a hotel that bore his family's name and what that name had originally meant, not the 240 million it had grown to represent, but the thing it had meant before that, the thing his father had built from a motor lodge outside Memphis, and a standard he had held whether or not anyone with authority was watching. He picked up his phone and called. "David, I need the full file," he said, "whatever access is required." "That will require you to authorize it directly," David said. "From your own credentials, it will create a log entry under your name." "I know. Watts will likely see the access notification." "I know." He authorized the access that evening from his home office. He read all 11 pages. What he found there had the specific quality of something that should not have been possible to bury, and had been buried anyway, not through one decisive act, but through a series of small procedural inactions. each of which could be explained individually and which together added up to the same outcome as if someone had simply closed the file and put it somewhere dark. A housekeeper named Patrice Odom had filed a formal workplace complaint 8 months ago, citing Cole for a documented pattern of conduct toward female members of the housekeeping staff. 2 colleagues had provided written supporting statements. The HR intake coordinator had prepared a summary which Calvin read carefully 3 times, recommending that the matter be elevated to an independent review process outside the normal chain of reporting given who was involved. That summary had been received by Watts' office on a Thursday. The following Monday, Patrice Odom's schedule had been changed to the least desirable configuration available on the property, a rotation that gave her the fewest consecutive days off and the latest possible start times, and that put her in direct daily contact with the person she had filed the complaint against. 6 weeks after the schedule change, Patrice had resigned. The independent review had never been opened. Calvin sat in his home office for a long time after he finished reading. The city moved outside his window, and he did not look at it. He thought about Denise, who Calvin was now certain had known about the grievance from its inception and who had managed a flaw in the month that followed where one of her staff had done exactly what the process said to do and had been punished for it and had left. And who had absorbed that outcome the way she absorbed every other structural failure in this building. By redistributing the weight across the people she still had and continuing to hold the standard herself because the standard was what she had and setting it down was not something she was able to do. He wondered what it had cost her to stay. He decided he wanted to find out. The following Monday, Calvin came back to the 14th floor at 6:45. And this time he wore his own suit. It was a strange thing, the suit in that corridor. He had spent 3 weeks moving through those service halls in grey uniform and rubber-soled shoes, and the suit felt overdressed in a specific, uncomfortable way that he understood was the correct discomfort. This was what the building looked like from his side. This was the visual language of authority arriving where it had not been expected. Denise was in the corridor reviewing the week's room turn schedule with Rosa. She did not look up when he turned the corner. He said, "Mrs. Pryor." She looked up. She took in the suit. Her face did not change. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "and I'd like you to hear it from me first, before anyone else in this building has the opportunity to characterize it." She went very still, not frightened. The specific stillness of a person who has learned over years that certain sentences, delivered in a certain register, carry a weight that it is wise to prepare for. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a business card on her cart. She looked at the card. The card had his name on it, and his title, and the Hargrove Grand's own corporate address. She looked at the card for a moment the way she looked at everything, long enough to read it fully and without the performance of reaction. She looked at him. "Calvin," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Rosa had gone absolutely still in the doorway of 1401. Calvin was aware of her the way he had become, aware of most things on this floor over 3 weeks peripherally and accurately. "How long?" Denise said. 3 weeks, he said. "I needed to see the hotel as it actually operates, not as it operates when its owner is present." She did not look away from him. Her expression was not what he had expected, and he realized he had been bracing for anger or for the shuttered professional neutrality that people deploy when they are deciding whether they are safe. What he saw instead was something closer to recognition, as if a thing she had suspected without naming had been confirmed, and she was now deciding what to do with the confirmation. "What did you see?" she said. "I saw someone doing a job that requires 3 people on the salary of 1, he said. "I saw equipment requests pending since August. I saw a member of your staff spend 11 seconds correcting a cart that was already correctly loaded because a manager instructed her to, and I saw her comply because the cost of being right in this building has been made higher than the cost of compliance." He paused. I read the full grievance file, all 11 pages. Something moved across Denise's face at that, brief and complicated, the expression of a person hearing that a thing they have carried alone is no longer only theirs to carry. "Patrice deserved better," she said. "Yes," he said. "She did. I intend to tell her that directly, with an apology and with whatever material correction I am able to offer, if she is willing to hear it." The corridor was quiet around them. Somewhere on the floor, a door opened and closed. "What happens now?" Denise said. "That depends in part on what you're willing to tell me," he said. "I have 3 weeks of my own observation. I have the documents my assistant has been compiling. But I don't know this building the way you know this building. I never have. I'd like to change that." She looked at him steadily. "2 steam cleaners," she said. "Before anything else, they will be here by Wednesday," he said. Something moved across her face again, and this time he could read it more clearly. The specific, complicated relief of a person who has asked for the same thing many times and been put off many times and is now, for reasons they are still assessing, being told it will happen. It was not quite trust. It was closer to the cautious opening that comes before trust, the moment when the door unlocks, but the hand is still on the frame. "Then I'll tell you what I know," she said. She told him. They stood in the supply corridor for 40 minutes while Rosa quietly resumed her rotation and the morning crew moved around them on their various carts, and Denise told Calvin what the Hargrove Grand looked like from the inside. Not the inside he had seen over 3 weeks, which was the inside of one floor on one shift with the specific limitations of a new hire's vantage point, but the inside she had been observing for 7 years in the role she currently held, and 3 years before that in the role she had held. Before it 10 years, total in this building. Long enough to have watched it drift by degrees from the hotel she had believed she was coming to work for when she accepted the position to the hotel that required her to spend a significant portion of her daily energy compensating for the distance between what it should be and what it was. She told him about the equipment failures and the pattern of the supply inconsistencies and the 3 conversations she had attempted with Cole over the course of 18 months about the conduct she had observed and the feedback she had received from her staff and the way each of those conversations had been received, which was politely, with the specific courtesy that senior managers extend to department leads whose authority they do not actually recognize. She told him about Patrice, about the quality of Patrice's work over the years before the complaint and the timeline of what had followed the complaint and the specific moment, 6 weeks in, when Patrice had come to her office and sat down and told Denise she was leaving and what Denise had said, which was that she understood, and what she had wanted to say, which was different and which she had not said because she had no authority to make it true. She was not bitter in the telling. She was not angling for anything. She was delivering information the way she delivered information about supply shortages, with the same level precision, because information was what was being asked for, and delivering it accurately was what the situation required. When she reached the end of what she knew, she stopped. "Thank you," Calvin said. "What happens to my team?" she said. "Nothing bad happens to your team," he said. "That is a promise I am making to you now and intend to be held to." She looked at him the way she had looked at him on the first morning in the service entrance, assessing the gap. "People in your position make promises," she said. "Some of them they keep because it is easy. Some of them they keep because there is someone watching. I have been in this building for 10 years, and I have seen a great number of promises made by people in positions like yours." "I know," he said. "I understand why you need more than a promise. I intend to earn what a promise from me should mean." She held his gaze for a moment, one of those long considered looks that she applied to new situations and new information, and then she nodded, a single, precise movement, and turned back to her schedule. He let her work. By the end of that week, Watts had been called to Calvin's attorney's office for a meeting that lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Cole had been placed on administrative leave pending an independent review of his conduct that Calvin had engaged a firm outside the hotel's existing HR structure to conduct. The restricted archive that had held the back 8 pages of Patrice's grievance file had been opened and its contents provided to the independent firm. The HR coordinator who had drafted the original escalation recommendation had been located in her current role at another company and asked, with her consent, to provide a full account of how her recommendation had been received and what had followed. The steam cleaners arrived on Wednesday as Calvin had promised. He knew about the arrival because Denise sent him a text at 7:43 in the morning. 2 words. Equipment received. He kept that message. On Thursday morning, he came back to the 14th floor, not as Marcus Webb and not as someone arriving to inspect, but simply as the person responsible for the building, arriving at the floor where he had spent 3 weeks learning what he had needed to learn, because there was a conversation he needed to have with Denise that he had been thinking about since he read the 11 pages, and having it in a formal setting would make it formal when what he needed it to be was honest. He found her in the supply room reviewing inventory. He knocked on the open door frame. She set down her clipboard. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said, "Director of Hotel Operations, Hargrove Grand. The salary will be set at a figure that reflects the work you have been doing, not the title you have been given. You will have full authority over housekeeping operations, maintenance scheduling, vendor supply contracts, and direct reporting access to me on anything you believe requires my attention. No intermediate layer between you and the decision." Denise was quiet for a moment. "I've been asking for steam cleaners since August," she said. "I know. I've been asking for a payroll adjustment for my senior housekeeping staff for longer than that, Rosa in particular. That will be corrected this week, retroactively, to the start of the quarter." She looked at him. The supply room was small and lit by a single fluorescent fixture, and the sounds of the morning crew moving in the corridor came through the open door behind him. "I want Patrice contacted," she said. "Not by HR, not by an attorney, by you directly. With an apology that means what an apology is supposed to mean. That call has already been arranged," he said. "Patrice has agreed to speak with me. The conversation will happen this week. And I want the independent review to have whatever access it needs," she said. "Whatever files, whatever people, no restricted folders, already in place." She looked at him a moment longer. "Then I'll take the position," she said, "on the condition that you understand I am going to tell you things you don't want to hear, regularly, for as long as I hold this role, because this building has a significant amount of ground to recover, and I am not willing to pretend otherwise to make anyone comfortable, including you. That is specifically why I want you in the role," he said. She held out her hand. He shook it. "If you have ever been the person who held the standard alone, who kept doing the right thing in a building that had stopped rewarding it, who filed the forms and made the requests and showed up anyway, leave a comment. We want to hear from you. Because those people deserve to be seen, and this channel is for them." 6 months after that Thursday morning, the Hargrove Grand received a full housekeeping operations audit score of 97 out of 100, the highest in its history. The independent review of the grievance proceeding had concluded with a formal finding and a financial settlement that Patrice received in February. 3 people had departed from the hotel's management structure in the months that followed, including Watts and Cole. The HR coordinator, who had written the original escalation recommendation, had been offered a role at the Hargrove Group's corporate office and had accepted it. Rosa Mendez had been promoted to senior housekeeping lead, effective the first of the year, at a salary that reflected what she had been doing for 9 years rather than what she had been paid for it. She had been offered the promotion personally by Denise, who had walked it over herself rather than sending the paperwork through the department system. The equipment line in the housekeeping supply budget had been restored to its full authorized amount and increased by 30%, with a standing directive that any replacement request aged beyond 45 days without resolution would escalate automatically to the director's desk. Denise moved into the Director of Hotel Operations office at the end of March. The office had a window that faced Commerce Street and a desk that was larger than she needed, and she kept her worn, laminated orientation packet on the corner of it, not as a keepsake, but as a working document, or because she had revised it substantially in the months since the conversation in the supply corridor, and she wanted it visible so that the people who came to her office knew what the standard in this building looked like and where it came from. Calvin came by the office one morning in April to sign off on a vendor authorization she had routed to him. He knocked on the open door. She was on the phone with a supplier, her voice the same level direct register she had used in every conversation he had ever heard her have, no different in the director's chair than it had been in the supply corridor on the 14th floor. She held up one finger without looking at him. He waited by the door. Through the window behind her desk, the city moved in the spring light, the corner of 5th and Commerce, his family's name on the building's face. She finished the call and set the phone down. "The linen vendor is shorting the order again," she said. "Different vendor than the one from October, same problem. What do you need?" "Authorization to terminate the contract and issue a new RFP. I've already identified 3 qualified alternatives." "You have it," he said. He signed the vendor authorization on her desk. She turned back to her screen. "Then I don't need anything else right now." He almost smiled. He had been almost smiling in her presence for 6 months, and he was fairly certain she had noticed because she noticed everything, and fairly certain she had decided it was harmless because she had decided everything else about him in those same 6 months with the same deliberate accuracy she applied to inventory counts and schedule rotations. He left her office. She was already dialing. The hotel still bore his family's name. 41 floors of glass and stone at the corner of 5th and Commerce in downtown Atlanta. His father had built the first Hargrove property on a standard he had held without anyone watching, and his mother had held a different standard in a different building on a different floor, and had shown a 10-year-old boy what it looked like to do a job the right way, regardless of whether the person above you was doing their job the right way. Calvin had been 40 years old before he understood those 2 things as the same thing. What it had taken to bring this building back to what it was supposed to be was not a consultant's report, or a board meeting, or a budget review. It had taken a man willing to put on a uniform and push a cart for 3 weeks and be told, without ceremony, to wear shoes he didn't mind ruining. And it had taken a woman who had been holding the line for 10 years with a worn laminated packet and a standard she refused to drop, who had absorbed every supply failure and management failure and structural failure this building could produce, and had continued, shift after shift, to deliver to the guests in those rooms something better than the building deserved to offer. Because she had decided, long before Calvin applied for a job cleaning his own halls, that the standard was hers to hold, and she was not going to put it down simply because no one above her seemed to notice that she was holding it. Kindness keeps its own accounts. So does integrity. When it is the quiet, unremarked kind, the kind that shows up in the dark of a 6:45 Monday morning and does the work anyway. Patrice heard Calvin's apology on a Tuesday afternoon in February, in a phone call that lasted 37 minutes. She did not accept it immediately. She asked several questions that he answered as fully and as honestly as he was able, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said she would think about it. She called back the following week and said she had thought about it, and that she accepted the apology, and that she hoped the building had changed because she had cared about it more than it had deserved from her toward the end, and she did not like the feeling of caring about something that could not be bothered to care back. Calvin told her it had changed. He told her who was running operations now. She was quiet again. "Good," she said. That word carried the weight of a lot of other words she did not say, and he heard them anyway. He had earned that, he thought, the hearing of what was not said. That was the work of the 3 weeks on the 14th floor, not the observations about the steam cleaners and the supply shortfalls and the grievance file, though all of those mattered, but the quieter work of learning to be present in a place without the protection of authority and to feel at actual scale what it cost the people in that place to do what they did every day. He had asked for shoes he didn't mind ruining. He had not known, when he made the call back in October, and used a fake name and a Cincinnati reference and said yes, 6:45, he would be there, that he was also agreeing to ruin something else that had needed to go for a long time, which was his own certainty that he already understood what his name meant and what the building built on it was supposed to be. Denise had taught him the standard. She had been teaching it for 10 years to anyone willing to come to work at 6:45 and read the orientation packet and mean it. He had simply been, it turned out, the last one to arrive. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it. And if you want another story about people who hold the line in the quiet hours, there is one waiting for you right now. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, and events are products of imagination.